Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett. He's the publisher of thecorbettreport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's speaking to us from Japan. Welcome back to the show, James.
Always good to be here, Jim.
The South Korean president dethroned, or whatever term they might use in South Korea. Can you tell us about the scandal surrounding her?
Well, the scandal it is, in fact, about an advisor who was advising her from behind the scenes and directing business opportunities her way and things like this. But I think it's actually something of a deeper scandal, and I've seen this portrayed a little bit in the media, but not very much. I think this is something to do with the generational divide in Korea, where, of course, it's a relatively new democracy, such as it is even, and of course the now former prime minister president was the daughter of one of the former rulers of the country, one that is not well liked or well looked back upon, but that was part of the overseeing of the turnaround of the South Korean economy, so that the older generation sees in this attack on his daughter as something of an attack on them and the way that they helped to turn the nation around. So there is something of a generational divide in this Korean struggle that's going on. But regardless of what it is, yes, we've just seen really quite an amazing turnaround. So Gunhee Park is out, and it remains to be seen who is going to take the place. So I think it's extremely interesting what is happening right now, but we'll have to see how this shapes up. But I think there is something of a generational tinge to this scandal.
The head of Samsung is behind bars in South Korea. What's the story there?
Yes, I don't even remember the details of this, but certainly there have been some huge scandals in Korea in corporate scandals, and this one has to do with he's a Samsung exec and also an heir, Lee Jae-young, and he was impeached on December 9th on charges of bribery and corruption. So apparently he was trying to squeeze money out of large companies in return for personal favors, and this has just come to light, and he has been impeached for it. So unfortunately not particularly surprising in the scandal-ridden Korean economy, but perhaps surprising insofar as he's actually been indicted and arrested for it, which is a pretty major move, obviously, for a major international corporation like Samsung.
China has fined a group of traders $173 million for illegal trades that profited them $6 million on the Shanghai and Hong Kong markets after manipulating things. Is this typical for China to fine people that high? And are they lucky that they weren't taken out and shot?
Well, I think they might look at it that way, certainly. Yes, there has been a crackdown on corruption of various sorts over the past few years of the Xi Jinping administration of China. But I think we would be naive to think that it isn't a politically directed crackdown on corruption, so that even some high-ranking politicians have been caught up in this, governors of various states, essentially in China. But I think these are people who present something of a block or a hindrance to Xi Jinping and his administration. So I think it's more a use of a cover of anti-corruption to bring down certain political hindrances. But having said that, there are obviously, endemic corruption in China, and that is very much the way the system functions. And I think China is particularly on edge about traders and the way that they manipulate the markets. And of course, what China considers to be market manipulation could just be prudent trading given the environment that they're trading in. So that, for example, of course, we saw famously a year and a half ago when we saw the Chinese stock market tanking quite abruptly, we saw the Chinese government coming in and saying anyone who's selling too much too quickly is going to be accused of market manipulation, which is their way of saying don't get out or we'll find ways to make it unpleasant for you. So I think there's a lot of different layers to a story like this. It's not to say that this corruption doesn't take place or manipulation isn't happening. It's just that what manipulation is actually enforced against is, can be quite revealing in terms of what it says about China's policies.
Saudi Arabia and Japan had a summit meeting that we didn't hear much about on this side of the pond. What was it all about?
So King Salman was here visiting Japan, visiting Prime Minister Abe, and they hammered out something that they're calling the Saudi-Japan Vision 2030 plan, which involves basically the crowbarring open of Saudi Arabia to foreign investment and expansion of industry, as Saudi Arabia tries to transition away from the fossil fuel industry. So as, for example, Saudi Arabia is starting to divest itself of Saudi Aramco and starting to try to diversify the economy, basically this Saudi-Japan Vision 2030 plan is going to be involving various ministerial cooperation. The Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, for example, in Japan is going to be cooperating with the Saudi Ministry of Commerce and Investment and Saudi Aramco and the Japan International Cooperation Agency. They're going to be working together on 31 different projects that are prioritized in 9 different fields, including industry, energy, agriculture, infrastructure projects. And there's going to be basically a Japanese sharing of techniques for maximizing industrial productivity. Japan Post is going to be working with its Saudi counterpart on improving cross-border e-commerce, things of that nature. And I think the long-term plan here is that ultimately Saudi Arabia, as I say, is looking to diversify its economy away from oil. And Japan is looking to be part of that diversification so that they have their foot in the door for a number of reasons. I think 2 major ones come to mind. One is that Saudi Arabia is demographically speaking almost the exact opposite of Japan, whereas Japan is an aging and dying society. Saudi Arabia has nearly half of its population is under the age of 25. So demographically, it is clearly going to be an important investment for the future for businesses that are looking for markets to expand into. And also, just strategically, Saudi Arabia provides 30% of Japan's oil consumption, and obviously Japan being an energy importer, that is an extremely important relationship that they want to foster and grow. So I think they're seeing this as a win-win for both economies, and it is definitely part of Saudi's transition away from being simply a kingdom based on oil revenue.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, there's a trial involving Monsanto and its popular leaf-killing chemical Roundup. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, so this is in fact a consolidation of, I believe, 31 different lawsuits that had been brought against Monsanto over the years about Roundup, which is the trade name for glyphosate, which is, as you say, a weed killer and herbicide that is in fact now the most used agricultural chemical in history. So it is quite widespread and pervasive in the environment, but there is increasing concern about the health effects. There have been concerns about the health effects of glyphosate for a very long time, but of course, famously in 2015, the World Health Organization declared it to be a probable carcinogen rather than the possible carcinogen that had been labeled by various government agencies before that point. That upgrading of the threat what did present a serious challenge to Monsanto and did help to spur a number of lawsuits in America, specifically by Americans claiming that their non-Hodgkin's lymphoma was caused by glyphosate. And these different lawsuits have been consolidated in the Northern District, U.S. District Court, as a multi-district lawsuit that is a class action suit that is now taking place against Monsanto, and it's now the judge is going through and deciding what can or cannot be brought to trial and in what way. And there have been some interesting moves on that front lately. For example, in some of the filings that have been made that have come out, there was a former EPA employee who had to retire because she herself had contracted cancer, who wrote a letter to her former employer in the Cancer Assessment Review Center or something, I can't remember the exact acronym, in the EPA, saying essentially there are 14 different mechanisms by which glyphosate could be considered a carcinogen, cancer-causing, and yet she was addressing specifically her former employer and others in the EPA were going out of your way to basically cover this up or to try to put a lid on it. 9 months after writing that letter, that particular ex-employee, of course, did die of her cancer. And so that was one of the very interesting exhibits that's come out. But just in the last couple of days, there's been even more movement where the former EPA deputy who was named in that letter is now there's even more information that's come out because the judge has unsealed some of the filings, including allegations that he had said directly that he should be given a medal for helping to scuttle one of the EPA's investigations into the potential cancer link to glyphosate. So some pretty interesting and potentially shocking for people who did not know about the collusion between EPA and Monsanto to see this. So now that the court case is increasingly centering around the linkages between the EPA, which is supposedly regulating companies like Monsanto and products like Roundup, and the employees there who are seemingly quite on board with Monsanto and actually working to try to suppress information that's detrimental to them.
I saw a headline that said chief financial officers worldwide are worried that Trump and his policies will lead to a trade war with China. Is there concerns in Japan about that?
I think there has to be concerns everywhere. And, of course, what affects the U.S.-Chinese trading relationship will affect Japan and Canada and every other economy in the world, because at this historical moment, I would say that the U.S.-China trading relationship is in many ways the backbone of the global economy, insofar as the majority of global growth in the last several years has come from China. And of course, China's economic growth has been very much predicated on its trading relationship with the U.S. So disruptions to that can have extremely large effects, knock-on effects throughout the entire global economy. And I think it's in everyone's interest to be aware of this and the potential for something like a trade war, which unfortunately, if historical precedent is anything to go by, trade wars tend to develop into real wars quite quickly. And we already know there's a great degree of military tension in this region generally. Speaking of, for example, North Korea and the military exercises that are going on there and the intercontinental ballistic missiles that North Korea is getting ready to test, and the anti-missile defenses that are being put into South Korea that China thinks of as a threat to China. There's a lot of tensions on the table already, so a trade war would have not only severe economic consequences for the global economy, but potentially very, very real consequences for the safety, certainly of people in the Asia-Pacific region, but perhaps the globe generally.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after this.
GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond-producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109-carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Keep informed. Receive our weekly recap of thought-provoking articles, podcasts, and radio delivered to your inbox for free. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage, HowStreet.com. Welcome back. We're chatting with James Corbett. James, how scary is it in Japan with North Korea firing off these missiles to test them in your general direction?
Well, it is very concerning, we'll put it that way, and as a result, of course, Japan has been raised to its highest alert level in the wake of the most recent test of 4 missiles that did fall into the Sea of Japan, not very far from where I'm sitting right now. And although it is not believed that those were intercontinental ballistic missiles, at any rate, North Korea has said that they are ready to test and deploy ICBMs at any time, which of course is one half of the way towards the potential to deliver a nuclear payload to the continental United States. The other half of that would of course be the miniaturization of the nuclear warhead, which they have not demonstrated they have been able to do yet, but it's only a matter of time, given that their nuclear program is progressing. So it is certainly a direct and immediate concern to Japan, and as I say, I think probably to people around the world who are concerned about the prospect of a new rising nuclear power. And there have been suggestions put on the table. For example, the Chinese foreign minister said quite recently that, well, the solution to this problem should not be that difficult. How about the United States stop its annual military exercise with South Korea, where they practice an invasion of the Korean peninsula, including dropping dummy nuclear warheads on Korea, amongst other activities. And in return, we'll make sure that North Korea stops its nuclear program. And that was immediately rejected by U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, who basically said that's not going to happen. We're going to continue our military exercises. So unfortunately, no one seems to be willing to not even back away, but even just to put their arms down and try to negotiate what's happening here. So it's a very sticky situation, and it doesn't look like it's going to be resolved anytime soon. And of course, that is good news for the military-industrial complex, because there are many military-industrial contractors who are making a lot of money off of arms sales, drone sales, all those types of technologies. In fact, the Asia-Pacific region is one of the fastest-growing regions in terms of arms sales on the planet. I think shortly behind the Middle East, where obviously Saudi Arabia is financing its incursion into Syria and Yemen and other places and things of that nature. But Asia Pacific is not far behind, with everyone really arming to the teeth in preparation for what could be a very large-scale regional war.
Is this part of China's drive to surpass the U.S. economically and in influencing the rest of the world?
Well, I think this is part of the inevitable extension of China's incredible economic growth of the past decade and a half. At some point, that has to turn into a sort of political or a real-world extension of Chinese power, as it were. And I think the way that the Chinese government has put this on the table is that they're going to be financing, for example, investment in infrastructure as part of their One Belt, One Road policy that they've already committed almost $1 trillion towards, and which is starting to transform the African continent and Central Asia and other places to provide transportation infrastructure for Chinese projects, which of course also benefits the member nations. That's, I think, the vision that we could see going forward, but it's likely to be thwarted by such things as U.S. AFRICOM and NATO and the anti-missile defense systems that are going in South Korea and other other acts that are seen as military provocations. And of course, North Korea then becomes something of a proxy for this tension that's growing between China and the United States, and as I say, has knock-on effects not only throughout the global economy, but really in terms of security.
Now that the U.S. has dropped out of the TPP, I've heard word that China is perhaps thinking of replacing the role the U.S. would have had.
Yes. In fact, that was floated almost immediately upon the ending of the TPP, or at least in fact, even before it was formally ended, even when Trump was elected and he said he was going to scrap the TPP, China had already floated the idea, and Australia, interestingly, has already signaled its support for the idea. So this was back in November, again shortly after the U.S. presidential election, and in an opinion piece that was published by the Australian Financial Review back in November, the Australian Trade Minister said that Australia would support a proposal for a Chinese-led free trade area of the Asia-Pacific. So that the wheels are already in motion for such an idea and would obviously transform the future of the region, which up till this point has been dominated by the United States and everyone believed would continue to be dominated by the United States. There is an opportunity now for China to really take the reins and start driving this quest towards some sort of regional economic compact.
How is China's real estate doing right now?
China's real estate is perpetually in crunch and crisis mode. I don't know the latest from this week, but I do know that obviously real estate investment is continuing to grow as the Chinese government continues to try to stamp down and cool down the markets. But it is it's like pushing on a string, especially as we've talked about before, with the largest migration in human history now being attempted, at least by the Chinese government, trying to move hundreds of millions, ultimately, of people from the Chinese countryside into these increasingly cramped urban areas, and then hoping that that somehow they will be able to also maintain property prices within reach of these largely industrial workers. It seems to be quite a paradox, and it's not likely one that they're going to be able to resolve nicely. But at any rate, the latest news that we do have is that Chinese real estate investment growth has just hit its fastest clip in 2 years. So there, again, there's every indication that Chinese real estate is going to be a particularly important issue for China as it continues to clamp down on capital fleeing from the country in the form of real estate investment overseas, and B, tries to keep a handle on its own property markets as people look for really anywhere to try to get some returns out of their savings.
Any luck with China getting people to move into all those big empty cities?
There's still a lot of ghost towns at this point. I think they're trying to transition away from an economy that relies on the construction of ghost cities in order to basically feed the economic juggernaut that they've had of growth, at least paper growth, in the last several years. But I think it's going to be difficult to wean themselves off of that. And it's very interesting to see the way that China will attempt to try to transition its economy away from export dependency and into something resembling domestic demand, but it's going to be extremely difficult to accomplish. And one very noticeable symptom of that is the ghost cities that continue to remain largely unoccupied in various parts of China.
James, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you very much for having me on.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of the CorbettReport.com. He was speaking to us from Japan, where he has worked and lived since 2004. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. If you have any questions for us, you can send them to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.